happening as well. Oh, this is cool.
The Design Museum in London has opened a new exhibition on ASMR.
They would do something like this.
Yeah, I can hear it. There I met Dr. Giulia Poerio to uncover the science behind this phenomenon.
It's actually making me gag. It's the dripping of the water. That literally made me feel physically sick.
Hi Giulia, thank you so much for coming to chat with me. So tell me a little bit about you and the research that you work on.
Yeah, so I'm a psychologist at the University of Essex, and I do a lot of research on emotion and cognition and the interaction between the two things, but I've also more recently started doing research into ASMR.
And so what exactly, when we say ASMR, what does ASMR stand for and what exactly does that break down and mean?
Yeah, so ASMR is a pseudo-scientific term, really, that was coined in 2010. It means autonomous sensory meridian response, but that doesn't really have any kind of scientific meaning. I think the intention was to make it sound more scientific, but it doesn't really mean anything in science terms. But how I think about ASMR is as a term used to describe a particular kind of feeling. So I see ASMR as a feeling state that some people experience. So the feeling itself is often described as a kind of tingling sensation that originates in the top of the head and can spread downwards. It's associated with feelings of kind of euphoria and relaxation, and there are many different kinds of triggers or stimuli that elicit this sensation in people who are capable.
Do you yourself experience ASMR?
Yeah, so it's something that I've experienced my whole life, as long as I can remember, but I didn't know that it had a name. Well, it didn't at the time when I was young, and I also didn't know that other people experienced it. So like many other people who have ASMR, I thought I was like a bit weird, and maybe that I was like the only person that had this sensation. But the internet really allowed ASMR to kind of come into this public consciousness, and people have a label to describe this experience that they've felt for their whole lives, and then they can now watch content online to induce this feeling rather than waiting for it to happen to them, which is incredible.
Now, if people are looking to experience ASMR, are there any particular videos you would recommend or any places they could go?
Yeah, so I mean, YouTube's always a great place to start, and you'll find millions and millions of videos. But if you want a truly kind of immersive experience to understand ASMR as a kind of subculture as well as this kind of emotional experience, obviously the Design Museum would be an amazing place to come, and it's also quite relaxing.
I have to say, very comfy.
So I think it's a really great way to kind of experience it in a way that has been curated very carefully and beautifully, rather than just kind of going on YouTube.
You say you experienced it when you were very young. What's your sort of like do you have a first memory of experiencing it?
Yeah, it's always really great to ask people what their first ASMR memories are. I don't have one particular memory, but I can think back to lots of different occasions where I've experienced ASMR. So things like a teacher's voice explaining something very carefully, watching a friend colour in, somebody doing my hair, and then a particular one with every year getting your feet measured for school shoes when they put the kind of the shoe thing and then
with
they put the
strap
tape
over the top.
Yeah.
Yes, I remember.
So that was always a really delightful ASMR experience when I was young.
And so that's a physical tingle that you feel throughout your body. Now, when I think of ASMR, I do think of the sort of videos. That's how I was exposed to it.
Yeah.
And through that, it's all sort of mainly auditory and maybe a bit of visual. But you're sort of describing maybe physical things inducing it. So it doesn't necessarily have to be non-physical touch that does it. It can be physical as well.
Yeah, so it's actually really interesting because I think because so much content of ASMR is online, people assume that it's primarily an audio-visual experience, so that you get this tactile sensation from audio-visual content, and that is true. But we've done some research that looks at the kind of common triggers, and touch, soft touch, what we would call affective touch, is the strongest trigger for ASMR. So people often forget that, and actually, what you see in ASMR content is simulations of touch very often. So you see people kind of coming up very close or pretending to kind of do your hair and things like that. So a lot of ASMR is about simulating touch.
I think when I think of it, the only sensation I think I've ever had that was close, I used to love, my mum used to stroke my hair, or just when she was brushing my hair, I always loved that. I don't think I've ever had the tingle. So is there any hope for me? Could I ever have a tingle? Or is it you can do it or you can't?
I mean, that's a really good question, and I don't know that we have the answer to that yet. My feeling has always been that it's something that you either experience or you don't, and it has a kind of developmental origin, so it's something that develops pre-puberty. But it's not something that you can kind of learn. But those people that do experience it vary quite a lot in the intensity of their experiences.
Is there any sort of particular differences in people who do experience it and don't that you've studied or looked into?
Yeah, so I mean we've looked at that, and other people have looked at that. So, you know, are there any other characteristics other than the fact that people experience ASMR that differentiates them? And there are a couple of things that have kind of emerged from research. One thing seems to be that people with ASMR tend to score more highly on a personality trait called openness to experience. So there's that. They also seem to be more kind of prone to experiencing other kinds of aesthetic emotions, so things like music-induced chills or frisson, yeah. So there seems to be a commonality there. There's also some interesting work, and this is something that I've done a bit more work on as well, is the idea that people with ASMR are more highly empathetic. And we've just published a paper looking at sensory sensitivity in ASMR, which suggests that people with ASMR compared to people who don't have higher levels of sensory sensitivity. So they're more sensitive to noise, sights and things like that. So we think that might be what's underlying at least aspects of the ASMR experience.
I find it interesting you say the openness to experience thing, because you know, there's quite a lot of trust you have to place. For example, if you're watching a YouTube video that you're relaxing to or planning to fall asleep, that they're not just going to suddenly go boo in the middle of it and, like, you know, startle you. So it kind of makes sense to me that, you know, if you are a person who's willing to place their trust maybe in other people a bit more.
That's very interesting, actually, that you say that, because in some ways ASMR, as it's mediated on kind of YouTube, is still very intimate, but you can be kind of vulnerable. Whereas in real life, it's actually, you know, a complete stranger maybe doing your hair, they can completely chop it all off. But I do think there's that sense of kind of intimacy and vulnerability that's happening within an ASMR experience. So it's interesting that you say that.
Yeah, fantastic. And I know you've done a bit of work on the actual physiological responses that happen when people experience ASMR. Yeah. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was kind of basic, really, in some senses, because there hadn't been very much research done, and a lot of times if you, you know, just ask people, how has this made you feel? It's not that you can't trust that, but it sometimes helps to have more objective evidence that isn't just self-reports. It's not just people telling us. So we looked at whether kind of people's experiences of ASMR are also reflected in their kind of physiological responses. So we measured things like heart rate and skin conductance response, which is a measure of sweating of the skin. And we find stuff that is consistent with what people tell us. So people who experience ASMR, when they watch ASMR videos, they show reductions in their heart rate. Which is what you'd expect. They also show increases in skin conductance level, which is a bit counterintuitive. And we wonder whether this reflects the kind of mixed emotional nature of ASMR. So people often describe it as quite euphoric, but also very relaxing. So our thinking is that perhaps what's going on is that as you're getting the kind of peak of the ASMR response, that's when you're getting physiological activation, and then it's then becoming relaxing. So that points to the kind of dynamics. So we're looking at that at the moment in the lab by actually getting people to rate when it is that they're experiencing ASMR, the onset and offset of that during their ASMR experience, and linking that with physiology to try and see whether that is perhaps what's going on.
That's fascinating. So that research is ongoing at the moment?
Yeah, so now that we can get back into the lab and we can wire people up and get them in and test them, we're doing that.
So the idea is that it might be that when the sort of arousal increases and you get the increased skin conductance, that's when the actual tingle is going? That's
when you're getting that kind of increase in arousal, which is associated with the onset of the tingling sensation that is so characteristic of ASMR.
So for people who maybe don't experience ASMR like myself, what can you compare it to? What could people do that might give you a kind of similar feeling?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably the most common similar experience is music-induced chills, or as you said, kind of that kind of frisson experience.
Get that, yeah.
Okay, so with that, I mean, that has quite a big history of research from psychology and also music, people who study music, psychology of music. And that would be kind of shivers down the spine, or you get the piloerection, the goosebumps where you get your hair standing on end. And there's been quite a lot of work looking at the characteristics of music that elicit that feeling. So we know a fair bit about that. And there seem to be some similarities with ASMR. So if you experience ASMR, you're more likely to also experience frisson and things like that. But it's not the same kind of response, in the sense that frisson is typically thought of as a kind of activating experience, whereas ASMR is, this very relaxing thing. But there are probably quite a lot of commonalities there. But I think that's the thing that most people can kind of relate to. But again, not everybody experiences chills from music either, or experiences of kind of feeling moved or touched that are associated with kind of a warm feeling in your chest or a lump in your throat and things like that. So it seems to be a complex emotional experience.
And when it comes back to ASMR, do we know what's going on in the brain?
Yeah, I mean, this is such a good question. I think people are always really fascinated to know. And of course, neuroimaging studies are really expensive, so we don't have loads of data on that. I mean, there was one study which was published in 2018 that looked at it compared areas of activation during ASMR tingling versus not in like 11 people. Half of them experienced ASMR, and then they found areas of activation associated with emotion, reward, and things like that, which essentially suggests that it's an emotional response, which we probably know, but that's helpful. Then there have been some kind of resting state fMRI studies which look at neural connections or patterns of neural connections in the brain when it's at rest, so not whilst watching ASMR videos. And there's some evidence to suggest that ASMR responders may be less able to inhibit kind of relationships between sensation and emotion.
Is there sort of an evolutionary thing that we think ASMR may have come from, that kind of bonding?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I'm not an evolutionary psychologist, so I'm maybe not the best person to answer that. I think some people have suggested that it might be related to kind of social grooming and affiliation and things like that. And of course, there probably is an element of that too. But it also could be that actually, the response that you're getting is something a bit different. I don't know. I do think it is strongly related to touch. So we've done quite a lot of work looking at how people who experience ASMR, what their early life experiences of touch were like, how they perceive different kinds of touch, and then also how they react to being touched. So I do think touch and that interpersonal element is really key to the ASMR experience in ways that perhaps you don't get with something like music-induced chills.
Fantastic. And I've heard of people who experience ASMR sort of almost getting an immunity to it after like watching too many videos or experiencing it too much. Is that a real thing, and can you get it back?
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. So that is, termed ASMR immunity, and essentially it's just like a habituation response. So your tolerance increases as you overexpose yourself, and you become less able to experience the tingle. So it's much like many other things where you get that habituation. What's really interesting actually is ASMR content creators and how they are looking to kind of overcome ASMR immunity by having lots of different kinds of triggers. So they're inventing new triggers like fast ASMR or aggressive ASMR or finger fluttering and lots of different things. So there's that sense in which if you're exposing yourself to kind of novelty in terms of triggers, that might then help you to experience ASMR if you have got immunity. And of course, the thing that I tell people most often if they ask me about this is just take a break and then maybe go back and watch some different content. So we do, when we get people to come into the lab, we ask them to not watch or engage with ASMR for like a few days before coming in, because we don't want that to affect their responses.
With such like an intense sensation that people enjoy so much, is there almost an element of addiction that can come along with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's much like anything else. So I often like to think about ASMR and how people use it in terms of regulating their emotions or using it to kind of feel in a certain way. And I think there are many different ways that we can kind of things that we can use, or tools or strategies that we can use to regulate our emotions. Music is a really good example, right? So you can listen to, something. If you want to feel angry to motivate you to run or something, you might listen to like a really fast piece of music, and that is regulating your emotion. In the same way that if you want to relax, or you're stressed, or you need to concentrate, you might kind of put on some ASMR. So I think that what's happening is that people are tapping into this as an emotion regulation strategy. Yes. And now, of course, some strategies can be adaptive and maladaptive for different people. A lot of things that we do that might be addictive could be kind of couched as maladaptive emotion regulation strategies. And I'm not saying that ASMR is maladaptive, but I think everything has the potential to be maladaptive if you engage with it in certain ways.
Great. And do you see a world in the future where it could be used in sort of almost a medical sense?
Yeah, I think this is something that I get asked about quite a lot, because I think, at least anecdotally, people say that they use ASMR for lots of different things. So they'll say, it's really helped me with my social anxiety, or it's helped me with insomnia, and that's a really big thing. I mean, from a research perspective, I think that it's really important that we actually try and understand whether this works, how it works, who it works best for, all of those kinds of things before kind of suggesting that it could be something that's used in clinical practice. I think the bar is much higher. That's not to say that on a personal level people might not find this enjoyable, but I think when it comes to kind of recommending or prescribing something in some sense, there needs to be that evidence base around it, and we don't have that at the moment. Of course, this is something that we're working towards. I think, a really interesting one for me is the link between ASMR and sleep, because we know sleep is very important for various aspects of our mental and physical health. But we don't know how ASMR is working in regards to sleep. So is it just that it's helping you get to sleep? And if that's the case, how? Is it stopping your intrusive thoughts, or is it making you more relaxed, or is it so you're not so sensitive to noise in the environment? Yeah. Or is it that it's actually doing something to your sleep architecture and improving it in some way? And I think these are the questions that I'm really excited to answer with research.